Kia ora koutou. Good morning. I'm Emily Perkins and I'm moderating this event with John Raymond. John is the author of the novels The Half-Life, Rain Dragon and the forthcoming Free Bird, which is named for the power ballad by Leonard Skinner, and I'm sure for other reasons as well. And his book of short stories, Livability, which is really wonderful, and I highly recommend you get this from your local independent bookstore, includes the stories Old Joy and Train Choir, which became the films Old Joy and Wendy and Lucy. And those collaborations with the director, Kelly Reichardt, also led on to the film MEEK'S CUTOFF, which John wrote just an original screenplay for. It's not based on a story. And the co-writing project, Night Moves. And he also worked with the director, Todd Haynes, on the adaptation of Mildred Pierce for the HBO series. So that's an interesting adaptation because it's based on a James Cain novel, but it's probably also known for the 1945 noir film, which plays fast and loose with the novel, and the adaptation is much more faithful. His fiction and his scriptwriting has won or been nominated for multiple awards, including the John Cassavetes Award at the Independent Spirit Awards, the Sundance Festival Humanitas Award, and an Emmy. He is from Oregon and lives there again now, having spent time living, studying, and writing in New York. John's stories have been described as sublimely electric, which I think gets at something that's key to the films as well, and that's pretty good. Yeah. But it does, I think, get to something that is happening in the films, which is that they're notable for their sort of sense of space and pace and openness, but also they're held by this tension, which is sometimes delicate and sometimes dense, but it's always to do with the situation that the characters find themselves in and what's driving them and the kind of urgency of the ideas underneath the films. And then there's this sort of extraordinary act of nerve and restraint in terms of what is not put on the screen or in the story. I think they're very spacious films that allow the viewer to enter them in quite an unusual way. So we're going to talk about restraint and control. We're going to talk about the sort of wildness that I think pulses underneath the scripts and at the edges. And we'll have some time at the end for audience questions, about 10 minutes. But right now, please welcome John Raymond.
Thank you. And let me just start by saying thank you so much to Emily for doing this. Emily is an amazing writer, and you guys should read her books. I'm halfway through one of them right now. Yeah. Also, I thought of an answer for the one you're talking about. So, yeah. Okay.
We'll do it then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we thought just to get in the zone, we'll start straight away with a clip. This is from Wendy and Lucy, and if you don't know the film, or do you want to set up where she's at with this moment?
Yeah, I can give a quick thing. So the film and the story are about a woman who is traveling through Oregon, where I live, on her way to Alaska to work in the fish canneries up there. And this is like an annual migration that happens, people going up to Alaska to earn money quickly on what they call them, like slop lines or something like that, but cleaning fish and canning them and stuff. Her car has broken down, and her dog has has disappeared, and she's been briefly detained for a little shoplifting episode. So what were her finances, which were precarious to begin with, have begun to crumble, and she's kind of stuck on the strip in Portland, and I think this is where she's going to seek out her dog in a pound, right?
Yeah.
Oh, sheesh. Yeah, look away from that.
Okay, so we can go right around the corner here. Mm-hmm.
So it seems to me that that scene is just doing so much in the most pared back and minimal kind of simple way. One of the things you mentioned yesterday in your masterclass was that you feel like you're interested continually, or have been, in stories of people being trapped in some way. And you know, the scene operates as a beautiful visual metaphor for that, for Wendy's situation, but it's also about her love and her sense of, you know, longing and all of that. So I just wondered if you could speak a bit to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this particular character, in a way, is like one of the thinnest and most ill-defined characters I feel like I've ever tried to write. And in a sense, she is almost purely a function of her problem, you know? Like, I really cared so little about the psychology of this character as the writing was happening, but only in having someone in a really terrible situation in a certain sense. And I think that was partly what I think allowed both Kelly and Michelle such, in a way, space and freedom in creating a beautiful character, because there kind of wasn't one there. She is a product of a financial crisis, and I think becomes a kind of, it allows you to project your own sense of kind of, love and fear and vulnerability onto this person. And I think, you know, there can be a kind of mystical idea about like finding the inner character and like finding the still small voice of the character and following it along. But sometimes it's really about just creating a coherent situation that almost anyone can relate to, and then just allowing that to sort of play out or sustain. I mean, a situation like that of, you know, hoping to see your dog in a pound, it doesn't take a lot of explanation, and I think the kind of tension and suspense and emotional power just is purely a function of duration. You know, it's like once you have the situation, it can then sustain, and there doesn't need to be that like talking that like goes on in so many movies. I mean, it's like watching people like explicitly articulate their feelings all the time. To me, it's just like uncomfortable. Like, I don't like hearing that in life, you know? And like, I would prefer, like, my sympathies for people usually come out of their silences and their inabilities to articulate things. And like, when they're actually talking about themselves and their problems is when I kind of shut off, and it's just like, you know, just fucking deal with it, you know? I don't know, there's something more, to me, it like, it allows the emotion to flow more. Yeah, perhaps that's my own perversity, but yeah.
But I think also it's about the universality that you're describing, like a situation that anyone can project themselves into, really relies on specificity to be able to feel, to have any power.
Totally. And yeah, this movie was actually really funny that way, because it does so much rely on this, I mean, basically an experience of poverty, you know? And it became this hilarious litmus test for people. Like, I once got an email from someone who's like, I went on a first date with this guy. Thank you so much, because after seeing the movie with him, I realized I never want to talk to him again. Because there's a scene where she like steals some dog food, and like some people are like, why would she steal dog food? That was the stupidest thing. Like, you know, she had a little bit of money still, and like, you know, she's just an idiot. She got herself into this problem. Where other people are like, no, that, you know, I feel for this poor girl with a dog, and like, it was just really interesting to see, you know, the judgments that people would then throw onto it. I don't even know what your question was.
No, I think that's really interesting, but I do want to, I mean, I want to talk about politics maybe a little bit after we've seen something else, but I was thinking about place, and, you know, you were talking yesterday also about how all your films have this kind of center. They come out of the ground of Oregon, they come out of the people that live there, the suburbs, the wild spaces, but how is that for you, being so close to that, like living there? Did it take you living away to be able to?
It did. It helped a lot. Like some of you might have seen yesterday a class thing that I did where I showed some not very mature work that I had done previous to this. And following, less than notable beginning. I moved to New York for a while and got an MFA there. And the writing that I was doing still remained very much grounded in the Pacific Northwest where I'm from. And it was a really interesting experience to start writing about there from a different place. And it was really clarifying in a way because partly simply I was left only with what I kind of remembered in a certain way. And my memory is not particularly strong. And it became clear that like what I remembered about my home was significant. There was some reason I was like, that had stuck with me, and that certain details of that now absent kind of place were available. And so it became a much simpler process where like all that kind of information that was just sort of in front of me disappeared, and there was only this kind of, plateau left. This is like a different thing, but I have a friend who had a traumatic brain injury not long ago. And he, for a while, was like he couldn't even walk out on his back porch because just the sounds of the leaves and stuff were so overwhelming to him. And it was just really interesting to realize just how much of your brain is about sort of filtering things out, and that like it's so much of cognition and like consciousness is about like redacting things, and that sort of process of redaction was really crucial. Yeah.
So how do you go about maintaining that sense of Oregon as a place of the imagination now that you're back living there?
It's been interesting. I mean, part of me, there is that sense of the landscape and that kind of raw experience of the earth. But the other part of a kind of regional identity that I am interested in is the actual history of the place and some of the ways in which larger currents of history kind of flow through a particular place, or the way smaller micro-histories that are only relevant to a particular place can operate. And so, in a sense, it's the idea of the place, or the culture of the place. And those things have interestingly kind of evolved over the course of my life in Oregon. When I moved there as a kid, I think there was still the sense of the Pacific Northwest as a very unknown kind of place. Like there was something, there's a poet named Richard Hugo who is from the Northwest, who is in a kind of Raymond Carverish vein, and who kind of spoke of the Northwest as basically a place where you break down, like people stay there because they just got stuck, and that was sort of the place that I felt like I grew up. Like it seemed very out of it. It seemed very marginal to the world. But over the course of my lifetime, like because of globalism and because of just various things, a different idea has kind of grown around the place. And like, just as a citizen, I find that an interesting thing, and as a writer, you have a kind of an engagement with your times, and times, like if you're in a place over time, like it continues to sort of nourish you in a certain way. That's just super banal. I don't know.
No, I think that's interesting. I'd like to look at the old Joy clip next and maybe talk about that in terms of the guys coming from that place in the way that you just described. They are probably, they adhere more to that earlier version of living in Oregon than the more, gentrified or whatever one it is. And also just that's, because this is the first story that caught the attention of Kelly Reichardt that she then wanted to make into a film, I think it's very interesting to examine the differences and the similarities between the story itself and the resulting film, and just maybe talk a bit about the crafting of the scene and the pressure that's underneath this scene.
Now, who the hell am I? They don't care about my theory. Doesn't mean shit to them. I don't have any numbers for it. I miss you, Mark. I miss you really, really bad. I want us to be real friends again. There's something between us, and I don't like it. I want it to go away.
Man, what are you talking about? We're fine.
Are you serious? Do you really think that?
Of course. Of course I do. We're fine. We're totally fine.
I don't know. God. God, I'm sorry. I'm just being crazy. I'm sorry. I'm just being crazy. I know. Don't pay any attention to me, okay? We're fine. Everything's totally fine. Feel a lot better now.
Yeah, no, it's funny to watch that. That is, so yeah, like in a strange and abstract and maybe elliptical way, to me that is like very much about a kind of regionalia and regional identity. And I was talking about this yesterday too. I mean, for me, the Old Joy Story was very much about a peculiar brand of, in my mind, like West Coast masculinity and a certain kind of New Age masculinism that is, I mean, I'm sure it's all over the world in many ways, but it's, you know, it's about sensitive men who are, that hug each other and are open with each other. And, but I was interested in exploring that in a more dramatic way by trying to find some of the subcurrents of kind of competition and kind of domination that even happen within this like very tender kind of masculinity. You know, the way in which some of those feelings of or those kind of ideas of openness and kind of, you know, non-patriarchal masculinity can still become cudgels that are, you know, that just fall back into kind of old patterns. And so, yeah, to me that scene was very much about, you know, a kind of competition of openness or a competition of sensitivity in some kind of way. Yeah, and that is very much, to me, a familiar kind of well, I mean, it's not like familiar like that, but you know, that I don't know. I found it grounded. It was strangely grounded in the region that I'm from, also.
I think too, just on a sort of craft level, it does this amazing thing of releasing a certain amount of tension that's been going on between the men and their silence, their mutual silence, and then, you know, the fact that the Kirk character says these things and that erupts for a little bit, but then he resets the tension again at the end of the scene. It's just reestablished in a really different way.
Yes.
And is that something that you think you naturally do as a writer? Does that, because it occurs in your fiction as well as in the script writing?
I mean, I do. I mean, I guess that is partly just something that is inherent in the kind of arc of a scene in a certain sense. You know, that I mean, you need to, you know, explore some kind of tension in a scene, and you need to come out of a scene with hopefully a different angle on that tension, or like a deepening of that tension, or sort of a new question that needs to be answered. And so, I feel like it is something that. That if a scene is working properly, it definitely needs to end with some emotional or moral question that then the subsequent scenes are going to address in some kind of way. Yeah, I mean, this one is kind of strange because the issue between them is so nebulous and emotional, you know? I mean, there's not like a particular problem in the same way of like not having enough money. It's just, it's the kind of free-floating tension between people that is, that's easy to kind of, that does occasionally crystallize, but then also can float away again. And I think it's a measure of Kelly's like incredible filmmaking that she was able to track on something that is that ineffable and kind of invisible. Because in short stories, like that's kind of your bread and butter, you know? I mean, that's what you do. But not very many movies, even of the small variety, like are willing to traffic in subtle gradations of human interaction, you know? I mean, it's much more about vengeance or redemption or things like that that don't make any sense to me. Yeah.
To that, I wonder if you could just read this little paragraph from the original story, because that, and you know, maybe we could talk about how that does arrive on the screen in a way.
Yeah. The story takes place from in the voice of Mark, the sort of more sane character. We kept walking, our shadows moving in shifting blobs over the ground. The sound of river rocks rattled under our feet. We turned around a bend in the stream and a curtain of poplars came into view, shivering in the distance, showing the white backsides of their leaves. I watched them for a while until an ancient, aching sorrow rose up in my chest. It was a familiar feeling. Something in the mute, unconscious trees resonated inside me, something so deep and fundamental it failed to remember its own source anymore. I watched the poplars flickering against the hard blue of the sky. What is sorrow, I thought? What is sorrow but old, worn-out joy? Yeah.
That's great.
And it's funny, okay, so obviously that happens like in a character's head in the story, and it was interesting to watch Kelly and everyone struggle with how to find a way to incorporate the title of the whole thing into dialogue in some kind of way. And so she ended up kind of repurposing that, a couple of those lines into a recounting of a dream that one of these guys had. And that occurs at kind of a pivotal emotional moment. And it's interesting though, because it did shift the kind of meaning between the two texts. Like, I mean, here it was sort of an idyllic moment, you know? It was this kind of response to nature in a certain way, like a sort of classically romantic sort of moment. In the movie, it becomes something else a little bit.
It's given to Kurt in the film as well.
And it's also it's given to Kurt, the other character.
Totally Which is interesting. I mean, I think, you know, this is a totally digression, but Eleanor Catton's adapting The Luminaries, her own novel, for the television series, and I think she was talking about like putting dialogue in other characters' mouths. So there's a sense in which I think that something belongs to the story.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I find that actually strangely often happens where you'll be writing something and you're like, well, what if the other person says that? And suddenly the whole scene makes so much more sense. Like it's weird how often just like shuffling the deck on who says what is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think that's great because it really speaks to don't be in your little box of what the character is and has to and would do.
Totally.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, I was thinking too about the way that these, you know, Old Joy and Train Choir exist as stories, and even though Train Choir is largely driven through the character that is called Verna, not Wendy, through her action, you do know a lot more about what's going on. You're told a lot more about, you're told really early on that she's going to Alaska for these various reasons, and in the film it takes quite a long time to reveal that. So I can understand the stories working as a particular document to then make the script from, but when you have written Meek's Cutoff, how did that work for you and for the director to not have this sort of prose version of the character's interiority to go from?
I think it it turned it into a slightly more a more prickly process. The first two, like by having the prose stories, there was something about that just kind of drained a lot of the kind of I don't know, territoriality that can happen, I think, in writing versus directing. I mean, I think there are, you know, inherent sort of authorial, you know, egos involved, or just like, whatever, just, you know, you're different people. Having the stories, I was like, always I had my story, and then she could do whatever she wanted with it. And I think for her, it was helpful to have some of those background prose paragraphs to kind of guide some of what turned into silent sequences. Or, I mean, there's a shot in Wendy and Lucy, I remember, where even in the script, it ended up like the Michelle character is like looking at someone and trying to alter something through her telepathy, you know, which is like a no-no in screenwriting. Like, you know, you can't have someone like attempting telepathy on the screen because you can't on the page because you can't get that on the screen. But for them, it was actually a helpful sort of thought to have in mind as they were going through a particular scene. Moving into like straight screenwriting, yeah, it did. It caused things to become a little more tense in a way because some of the, but yeah, so it's, on a personal level, I guess it did. But but then, you know, there comes a point then when the script, yeah, it just definitely enters the hands of the director and everyone else making the movie, and things just evolve dramatically.
But for your process, how does that work? Like, are you writing prosy kind of character notes for yourself, or are you discovering them through the dialogue, through the scene, or the action?
Yeah, the scripts do not, they're not overwritten. I think. I mean, I have come to realize, like, directors and art directors and everyone, they like to bring their own stuff to a script, and they actually almost resent a writer who is over controlling with some of that stuff. I remember looking at there's a screenplay that Fitzgerald wrote I once saw that was just so insanely detailed and ornate, and you're like, obviously this guy's not trying to write a script, he just wants to like make a movie, you know? And I think, you know, part of the job of screenwriting ends up sort of being way lazier than you would be as a actual prose writer, you know, and like allowing yourself not to finish certain things, you know?
No, I don't buy that, actually. I really don't.
I think it's just hard. I think it's hard for some like good and diligent writers to just like allow themselves to like not finish something properly, you know?
But you must have it, and you know, you must have it all there. Can we look at the MEEK'S Cutoff? I want to look at the MEEK'S Cutoff, the first clip, actually, and we might just...
We're having an argument about whether screenwriting is harder or not.
Yeah, not just that, but also that I think, yeah, I think being minimal is really hard. So...
Right. I will say, just before that, like, by the time we were doing MEEK'S Cutoff, I think there was I had certainly a much fuller understanding of Kelly's kind of rhythms and stuff, and so I think we both just very much more understood like what the ultimate thing was going to feel like. That, you know, the script was designed in some ways to incorporate some of these dilations of emptiness and open space, and you just start to understand the other person's voice in a certain way. So anyway, but we can watch something.
Okay. love that scene so
Yeah.
much. And it's I mean, when I saw the film, whenever it came out, and it's the scene that totally stayed in my mind, in this sort of complete way. Yeah. But the whole film is like a poem. I mean, it's like this sort of,
I think so,
yeah.
So just to clarify a little bit, like maybe it was evident that the shooting twice was the sort of signal to the men who are currently out searching for water that there's been some sort of problem. This like double shot is the signal to far-flung other immigrants to sort of return. And it was funny, I remember like one of our producers was like, God, do you have to wait the whole time to see them shoot twice? And it's like, and Kelly and I are like, what the fuck are you talking about? Of course, that's the whole thing, you know? I mean, it's like this thing is about these kinds of durations and about the kind of space of the West, you know? I mean, it's in many ways it is a kind of anti-Hollywood Western in that it really observes the reality of just the spatial immensity of the place that they're in, and it's like that. Just the kind of To me, I just love having to wait and watch her do that. They had to go to like a pioneer school kind of thing to learn how to like load the gun and like do a bunch of other stuff, and I'm just so amazed that Michelle like learned to do it so well. I mean, it's like that was. To me, I watched it, I'm like, that seems so fast. Like, that's incredible.
But it's a brilliant character moment for her as well, because she is so, she's so sort of steely through the whole thing, and she's holding so much of it together, and that she's the one to do that, and that, the great moment of surprise and dropping the sticks. And I wanted to ask you too about the character of the Cayuse man who, startles her, who comes back and plays this really sort of key role in the film. And about how you went about writing his character and what the actor brought to it.
No, it's a very interesting to me story. So the story of Meek's Cutoff is actually based around, like very loosely on an actual episode of the early Oregon Trail, which was the westward migration of Europeans across North America. And the basic story is about a mountain man that this group hires to guide them across the sort of last mountain range, across the desert and over the mountains, but who turns out not to actually know the way. And so this particular wagon train is lost in the desert, kind of going around in circles, potentially being led either by an incompetent person or an actually evil person. They're not really able to tell whether he's stupid or malign, which was part of the sort of Bush era resonance that I was hoping for in that story. There is an actual account. They kept diaries, and there are some first-person accounts of that voyage, and there were encounters with native peoples. Somewhat, but they're not really explored in the documents. It's not. That was where a lot of imagination had to sort of come in, but and for me that was where the real narrative crux of the whole story came in, because it really does. It ends up becoming a story about this group of white settlers who come across a lone native person in the desert, and who then sort of have to either have to communicate across a kind of unreachable language barrier, and then have to decide, like, again, whether to sort of trust this person to guide them towards water or possibly some other fate. Like there's a kind of a fairly like existentialist kind of colonialist encounter going on here, and it was a very like delicate and strange operation to write this American Indian character who was at once a kind of vessel for this white racist sort of gaze, but that was not just purely a function of that either. I mean, the movie is very much about the racism of this white group, and to you know, it's like a Camus kind of story in a certain way, and it was a very delicate operation to try and create a human character who also was kind of absorbing some of that gaze. And like we were talking before, it was to sort of to objectify that gaze rather than just indulge in that gaze. And it became a kind of yeah, like it was a tricky thing to kind of understand how to do. Yeah.
And just practically, like in terms of the language and stuff like that, and I mean, did you work closely with the actor?
Yeah, practically, yeah, with the language was really quite insane. So the Indian character is meant to be a member of the Cayuse tribe at that time. There are currently only 3 people, I think, in the world who speak that language anymore. And so I did go speak to one of those people who yeah, it was, I think we just wanted to get paid to do it, and we didn't have any money to do it. So we kind of shifted that then to the Nez Perce language, of which there are probably 33 speakers or something right now. And there's a language center at the, on one of the reservations out in Eastern Oregon with a group of people who are, you know, maintaining the kind of knowledge of the language and teaching it. And were incredibly helpful in translating certain dialogue into Nez Perce. Then our actor, Rod, is from, he obviously does not speak Nez Perce, well, not obviously, but he's of, I think, Crow descent, and had an amazing faculty for languages, like speaks like 7 different languages or something, but ended up having to memorize his lines phonetically, and would be out like doing his lines with like, you know, like a rock with like a few notes on it, just so he could kind of remember a little bit like what the sort of phonetics of it were. So by the time it all comes out, like God knows exactly, and then plus with the editing, where then Kelly was editing the movie without really understanding that language either, like it becomes incredibly garbled and probably, you know, well, just torn up, you know, but I do think we tried as hard as we possibly could, you know, to make it as genuine as possible, knowing that it was never gonna like really fully succeed, you know, yeah.
And that's presumably because you can't tell that story without having to.
No, I mean, so much of the story is predicated on this like language barrier, you know. I mean, to have like, there's other questions like, oh, are you guys going to subtitle the, you know, the native dialect? And it's like, no, that's the whole point, is that the viewer, like the immigrants, are not able to like actually understand it, and this is part of the kind of barrier they're facing. Yeah.
It's really interesting how both of his motivations and Meek's motivations are these 2 unknown things that are pushing, and yes. I guess pushing up against those white savior tropes as well, and,
totally.
And all of that. Yeah. Very
and the Meek character like ends up being a much more violent and kind of monstrous figure than the other settlers themselves, and
Yeah, he also gets some really great lines, and I wonder if we could just watch that. The next Meek clip, which might be the last clip we've got time for, but we'll just talk about that.
You never womaned, Mr. Meek?
Indeed I have, numerous times. Squaws of these parts start looking mighty white after 20 years' time.
Oh, dear.
Sometimes I get the sense you don't care for me much, Miss Tetherow.
Oh, I have no feelings one way or the other, Mr. Meek.
That's just a kind way of saying you don't like me.
I don't like where we are.
So that's what you think, that we're lost?
I'd say that seems about the right word for it.
We're not lost. We're not lost, we're just finding our way.
I certainly hope so.
We're gonna make it all right.
Oh, you don't need to patronize me, Mr. Meek.
Now I think you're flirting with me, man.
You don't know much about women, do you, Stephen Meek?
I know something or other.
If you say so.
Well, I know women are different from men. I know that much. Well, I'll tell you the difference if you care to hear it.
I don't doubt you will.
Women are created on the principle of chaos. The chaos of creation, disorder, bringing new things into the world. Men are created on the principle of destruction. It's like cleansing, order, and destruction. You think I'm wrong? You can tell me. But chaos and destruction, the two genders always had it.
Chaos and destruction. Well, I don't know. I have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the fact that they're knitting through that scene. It's like, hello, chaos.
Yeah, it's funny that it's also like a kind of a anti-Western in that it is very much from the perspective of the women, and the whole story is kind of transpires from Michelle's point of view. That binary of chaos and destruction, that was just like one of those weird gifts that happen where we have some friends, actually this sort of trio of witches, we call them. They're these like Wiccan women who live out in the woods near us, who are like old family friends, and we have Thanksgiving with them every year. And one of them, Roberta, who's like a woman I've known my entire life, like at some point during Thanksgiving, after handing us like the pickles that she had made that year with like weird shavings off the forest floor, gave that line about chaos and destruction. She actually was like, that was her theory of like the genders, that they're chaos and destruction. And I remember hearing that, I'm like, that is so fucking crazy. That's like Cormac McCarthy or something, you know? I mean, that's like so great. And it was just, it ended up being a perfect thing to put in the mouth of Stephen Meek, you know? Because I truly still don't fully understand what it means, but it's like, it sounds really profound. And I love that it came really from like truly like a Wiccan, yeah.
Brilliant. Maybe I could ask you a bit about genre, seeing as you're talking about sort of subverting the Western. We don't have any clips from Night Moves, which is another film that John wrote with Kelly Reichardt, and it's, but maybe you could just briefly tell everybody the setup for the film, because it's kind of a thriller in the same way that Meek's Cutoff is kind of a Western.
Yeah. I think Night Moves is really a thriller. I think it's just a straight up thriller, as much as we could do. It's actually, which would be an interesting question. I think it does embrace the genre in a way that like Meek's refuses it. But Night Moves is, it's like an eco thriller, you could call it. It's about a group of direct action like activists who embark on a plan to blow up a hydroelectric dam. And so in some ways, it follows a kind of heist structure, like, you know, like a pulling off a event, you know. And so they blow up the dam, and then in the aftermath, a camper downriver is killed. And then it becomes a kind of more psychological study as this terrorist cell kind of turns on itself and is kind of infested with paranoia and recrimination. Yeah.
So I wondered if you could just speak a bit to the politics that you brought to that film, and you know, I think all your films are very political in very rich ways.
They are. They are definitely shaped by political concerns. Night Moves was an interesting one. I mean, that was written sort of during the rise of the right-wing Tea Party movement in the United States, and it was at a time, in a time like even more so now, of like political kind of extremism and almost fundamentalism going on in the United States, but also worldwide. people being driven by ideologies in a really extreme kind of way. And so I wanted to do something that kind of explored that idea of people acting out of very zealous political belief. I truly can't comprehend the idea of that kind of right-wing extremism. Like the ideas of them seem so patently absurd that I couldn't really even comprehend making a character that way. But I can comprehend a very radicalized environmentalist. That to me there was a certain just touchstone with reality in some of the complaints that these particular activists held. And but then to me the interesting thing was to do something sort of perverse with it, and to try and push in some ways characters who I identified with and kind of even valorize on a certain level into some sort of uncomfortable and potentially destructive places. And so it became an interesting kind of political investigation for myself, kind of following kind of political ideas beyond the point of practicality or morality. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And which pissed off some anarchists, so, yeah.
It is a really great interview with John on a website called something like Anarcho Geek, where he gets taken to task for writing an unsympathetic anarchist character.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of just weird, gradations. It's just funny. I mean, I guess one of the problems I was saying that in the reception of that film was that, I take it for granted that most people want to destroy the industrial infrastructure, and that's sort of one of the basic premises of the film. And if you don't kind of come at it with that basic sort of truth, then the whole movie doesn't make that much sense. But yeah.
Exactly. I just want to follow that up, and then I'll open up to the floor for questions. But I'll just ask one more first along those lines, which is back to Old Joy. There's this extraordinary thing when the Mark character is driving. He always has the radio on to this talk radio show, which is it's a very interesting way of bringing the outside world and the world of politics this guy's problems and preoccupations into the film, and that obviously doesn't exist in the story, and I just wondered if that was a choice of yours or of
No,
Kelly's.
that was the thing that Kelly brought to it, and Old Joy also, felt very much like a product of the Bush era, and he drives around listening to liberal radio, and it both brings in the outside world, and I think it also kind of helps define one facet of his own personality and and his kind of aggravation or kind of fear of what's happening socially in some kind of way. He's also another great change that Kelly brought to Old Joy was making Mark an expectant father. In the story, they're just two old friends who have kind of grown apart. In the film, one of them is, on the cusp of parenthood, and it does create a much different and richer dynamic between them. That's something I so wish I would have thought of in writing the story.
Right, it's interesting. I kind of like that in the story you don't have that set up. Okay, so does anybody we would take audience questions now. We've got about 10 minutes left in the session, so if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. The question is how Kelly and I started working together. Yeah. It's been, one of the total blessings of my life. The question is, how did the collaboration with Kelly come into being? So around like the 2000 or so, I became friends with the director Todd Haynes. He had moved to Portland. It was a really great moment to meet Todd because he was kind of between projects, very open to people and things. Yeah, like I remember meeting him like in some cabin and we were hot tubbing. He just came out to hang out with people, you know, and I was like, oh, I can't believe I'm hot tubbing with Todd Haynes now. This is fantastic. But we became good friends, and he and Kelly are old friends, and so it was through Todd that I met Kelly, and we had some encounters, just like brief sort of social encounters, and she had made a really great movie in the mid-90s called River of Grass that's just got re-released, and but then had not been able to make a feature for like 12 years and had like various, I mean, as people know, it's hard to make a movie. She had come into a very small amount of money and was going to invest it in making her own a new feature for herself. And she read a novel that I wrote called The Half-Life, and she liked it and asked if I had anything to adapt. And the one thing that I had was that story, Old Joy, but which kind of fit her needs at that time, because she needed something that was very stripped down, and in this case, it was literally just a walk in the woods, and also that could incorporate her dog, Lucy, who, if she left at home, would like destroy her apartment. So it's like, oh yeah, those guys can have a dog, you know? I said this yesterday in the thing, like, I don't think there's another director in the world who would have read the story Old Joy and seen a feature-length movie in it. And I didn't really understand, like, her sensibility at that moment either. It was just like, oh, knock yourself out if you want to make a movie, like, whatever. And then she made a beautiful movie. She made a really gorgeous movie. And in the doing of that, like, we just started to become friends, and it was like the experience of going through Old Joy with her was really lovely. And before, you know, we just started working on the next thing, and things have led one to the next. And it's I think it's been this. The collaboration has sort of been also a kind of becoming friends and becoming like incredibly intimate with each other, and like sort of inseparable from just the gossip of our lives, you know? I mean, so much of it is just like talking about our friends and our parents and the news, and like that has kind of then shaped the direction of the projects. And it's I mean, we're not at the moment where, like, we've done 4 movies, and even really good friends have to kind of, you know, chill out sometimes, so we're not doing anything right now. But it is, you know, she was living in Portland this summer and like over for dinner like almost every night, and it's just, now we're just almost relatives, you know. It's been great. Yeah.
Having lived on the East Coast and the West Coast,
Yeah.
how do you, the receptivity of your collaborators, does that change depending on the coast?
The receptivity of the collaborators.
The things that you're discovering and exploring as you go, is it more receptive up in the Northwest?
Let's see, you know, it's interesting. So the question is about, kind of the collaborative environment on the East Coast of the United States versus the West Coast. I've been really lucky, I think, in that I've been able to collaborate with people. I mean, Kelly lives on the East Coast for the most part. And a lot of the people who've worked on the films have come from other places. I can't say that there's been like I mean, Portland is nice in that it's a small town, and that like people are up and game for doing interesting things. Like, there's not like an overabundance of opportunities. So when things come along, people are like ready to jump in and work. But it's, I don't know if I could really say that there, but also I find, you know, there's an amazing generosity and hospitality to like New York type people too. It's just, I couldn't say that there's anything dramatically different there. Yeah.
That makes me want to know about what you say yes to, right? So now you're in a position where people are coming to you with work, things that they want you to write or work on. What do you look for? What's a yes, what's a no? What are those qualities?
Yeah. Let's see. Gigantic amounts of money definitely are like a plus, which never happens. It's not like there's a flood of things coming in. It's not like they're like, get me that guy who writes the stuff where nothing happens, you know? Like, I don't think that conversation is happening in Hollywood right now. But there are occasional, occasional artful people who want to do things. I guess I will turn things down that seem just self-evidently cliched or that run, that just seem really underbaked. But also I will occasionally say yes to things that I don't necessarily foresee working, you know.
Why is that?
Well, just because you never know. Like, I don't trust myself that much, you know. Like, I often am wrong. So, I mean, shit, there's so many things I'm like, this person's not going anywhere. They're an idiot. And then it's like, oh, they're just won a fucking prize, you know. I mean, it's like, you know, like, I've learned that I don't know. So sometimes, yeah, I'm willing to be surprised sometimes. And even at the worst case, you know, with the film stuff, it's fun because you're always like, you meet a new person, you know, so it's like, and sometimes that's bad too. I mean, sometimes you end up meeting a person and you're like, wow, I was right, I don't like this person. But then as a writer, that has a certain morbid utility also, you know, because then you can repurpose them in some way at a later time. And like, because otherwise you're just sitting alone all the time. Like, you need some sort of input. So yeah, sometimes I will take things just out of my own perversion.
Cool, yeah, out the back.
I did not play any part, except I think I did turn her on to Miley Malloy, the writer whose work it's based on. Yeah, so I think there was a time when I would just sort of try to clear the room of any other good fiction writers when Kelly would come in. It's like, you don't need to know about other fiction writers, you know, it's fine. But then once we sort of agreed that, you know, she could see other people, then I tried to, you know, facilitate that in some way. So I will give myself credit for probably mentioning the name Miley Malloy to her at some point, but that's all.
Cool.
Have you thought about directing yourself?
Have I thought about directing? Something just so laughable about that idea to me. I am technically not very inclined. I don't know, and also it just seems like physically really hard work. Like, the whole idea of being on set it looks really tiring. And so those things kind of keep me away from it. And also, you know, I mean, I really like the sort of daily discipline of writing. Like, I like to have my creative life somewhat under my control, and I like to be able to do it in a regular, normal way. And I think filmmaking, so much of filmmaking is bureaucratic and administrative and kind of, you know, extra creative in a certain sense. And I don't know that I'm necessarily inclined to do all that stuff. Yeah.
Cool. I think we've got time for one more question. Yeah.
Can you return to your previous argument about what is harder, what is more difficult for the novel?
Novels are just so much harder. I mean, it's like, I don't see how this could even possibly be an argument.
Yeah, it's really, anyway, I'm going to say for the sake of being a good host that John wins this one, although I completely don't agree with him. Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you my rationale for I mean, to me, like, writing a paragraph is, I mean, it's some of the hardest work I can imagine, and part of it is like, you're having to create a continuous breath from sentence to sentence and keep a reader moving through this kind of, you know, dream space in a certain sense. And you're having to worry about, you know, so many like rhythms and so many like vocabulary words and just the logic and the colors and the texture. Like a script is, I mean, it has dialogue and structure, which are, you know, integral and important things, but it's just this kind of outline of the stuff, you know, and it just, I think Emily's not lazy enough to do it. I think she's, I mean, she does it great, but I think she's just, you know, that's my suspicion, is you probably work too hard.
I think you're being very, yeah. I think there is such an art in what you don't put in. Like that to me, that sums up, you know, your work. But it has to be there in order to not be there. You don't put it in and
take it out. You just never put it in there.
That's the end.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. I think there's another session right now. Yeah. And yeah, just one more time, let's say thanks to John Raymond.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. That was fun.
So yeah, if you want to listen to Dave Gibson's presentation, if you want to listen to